1980s, when the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 transformed the region, Pakistan became the frontline state supporting the Afghan Mujahideen.
We often call it brotherly, but in interstate relations, there is nothing like brotherhood or sisterhood. Afghan narrative has revolved around the Durand Line.
TTP, they focus or they seek to challenge the Pakistani state.
Its allies, all of them then used obviously Pakistan as the staging post for the entire so-called jihad. As far as the ideology is concerned, they are both inspired by Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. This has left Pakistan in a very critical situation.
Hello and welcome to New Wave History. Our guest today is a veteran analyst whose expertise spans over the most complex geopolitical issues of our time. He has spent over 3 decades at the front lines of global security and investigative journalism. We have with us Imtiaz Gul. Assalamu alaikum, sir. I have dissected the topic into a few parts, and I'll start with the 1947, when Afghanistan was the only country that opposed Pakistan's entry into the United Nations. Although Pakistan and Afghanistan are often described as the brotherly nations, but their relations have been tense since 1947. Where did this mistrust historically begin, and what are the factors that added to it?
Well, I think in the first we should clarify that Afghanistan did oppose the entry of Pakistan into the United Nations, but that was primarily based on a misunderstanding and on a telegraph that did not reach the Afghan ambassador at the UN from Kabul. So that telegraph basically reached about 3 weeks later, and Afghanistan corrected its position and accepted the entry of Pakistan into the United Nations. So this was, I think, this is what sowed the seeds of sort of distrust between the two countries. And then ever since, the relationship has really not been very, very good. I mean, we often call it brotherly, but in interstate relations, there is nothing like brotherhood or sisterhood. It's international, bilateral, multilateral relations largely depend on interests of the respective countries. And this is what then defines the nature of relations among those stakeholders. As for this bickering and the bad blood, primarily, if we recall back in the 60s, particularly when King Zahir Shah was on top of Afghanistan, and Pakistan got into a war with India. One of our diplomats who was present in Afghanistan at that time had told me personally, Fida Yunus Sahab, that he carried a message from General Ayub Khan at that time, asking the Afghan government for not attacking Pakistan in case the war with India gets prolonged. So we wrote it also, documented in my book as well. Zahir Shah said that this is your home, this is your safe backyard. Don't worry about the Afghan border. You just deal with India as best as you can, but you don't have to worry about this. The actual problems, I think, began sometime in the late 60s, early 70s, when the entire world was being swept by a wave of socialism or communism.
Sir, I'm sorry, I'll cut you here. We'll come to the 60s and 70s later. But first of all, I want to ask about the Durand Line. Since it's a history podcast, if we specifically talk about the Durand Line that was drawn by the British in 1893, how much of today's tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan, or the conflict that has stayed between both the countries over the decades, can be traced back to the Durand Line, because it was cut through the Pashtun tribal areas. Afghan governments have refused to formally recognizing the Durand Line, while Pakistan does consider it as an international border. So, what's your take on that?
Pakistan inherited this border in 1947. It was also duly recognized at the United Nations. And when Afghanistan recognized Pakistan's entry into the United Nations, so by implication, Afghan rulers also recognized the border, which they call Durand Line. Now, this has remained a sour point, a talking point, I would say, in Afghan politics, regardless whether socialists were ruling the country or Pashtun nationalists or the Afghan Taliban. So the Afghan narrative has revolved around the Durand Line. They say because the line was drawn by the British, so we don't recognize it, and it is all the areas up to the river Attock, primarily they call it occupied lower Afghanistan. So this has formed a permanent talking point for all Afghans, whereas I think Hillary Clinton, a former American Secretary of State, had also said it on a couple of occasions that this is the internationally recognized border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. However, the Afghans find it convenient that whenever tensions arise between the two countries, they just go back to they kick up this issue of Durand Line, which doesn't have much substance. Even very recently, I think the Afghan defense minister, Mullah Yaqub, once again reiterated that the actual problem between the two countries is the Durand Line, which is, I think, a very frivolous, superfluous argument, because the same Mullah Yaqub spent years in Karachi, in Pakistan's Karachi, with an Afghan visa. So whether it was Hamid Karzai, whether it was Mullah Umar, whether it is Mullah Yaqub, or several other leaders who have been coming to Pakistan for studies or for business, they've been coming on visas. So they basically, when they apply for the visa for Pakistan, so by implication, they are recognizing the border. This is just a political stunt they raise every now and then just to score points. And I don't see much substance in this claim.
Okay. So now if we come back to your 60s and 70s story, can you please carry on with that in order to elaborate the reasons of this conflict?
Particularly since the late 60s and early 70s, when socialism, communism was sweeping across the globe in several countries, Eastern Europe, South America, South Asia, particularly the younger generation, students were drawing inspiration from socialism, the ideas of socialism, communism, as propagated by the Soviet Union and by China. And I think the same movement also took ground here in Pakistan as well, and it motivated a number of Pashtun nationalists based in Pakistan. They were at that time the Pashtun Students Federation, who were aligned with the Awami National Party. And their idea was they have always been advocating the greater Pashtunistan. And they thought, since they have now support of the Soviet Union, perhaps they should push for the idea of establishing the greater Pashtunistan. And for that, I think a central square in the heart of Kabul was also named Pashtunistan Square. which also received a bomb back in April 1990 when there was
Yes.
a civil war going on. So the people like Ajmal Khatak, Afrasiab Khatak, they all became the vanguard, the torch bearers of Pashtunistan. So a lot of an insurgency began in particularly the northwestern. At that time, it was a northwestern province, northwestern frontier province, and we saw a surge of violence, attacks, sniper firings, target killings, and they were mostly carried out by people who were inspired by the idea of Pakhtunistan. So this is where this division based on border. The Afghans don't call it border; they love to call it Durand Line. So
Yes.
this was the fascination that caught up with a lot of Pashtuns and who took up arms. Either they took up arms or went underground for their secret clandestine activities, acts of subversion against the state of Pakistan. A former chief minister, Hayatullah Sherpa, was also killed in one of such attacks. So particularly the 70s, mid 70s, and then this insurgency went up to the early 80s. This was a defining moment when the idea of this border or the Durand Line got really entrenched and gave the Afghan and Pakistani Pashtun nationalists a cause to fight for, a cause to stand for. And this is how, when General Ziaul Haq seized power in July 1977, all these Pashtun nationalists, including Afrasiab Khatak, Ajmal Khatak, they fled the country. Even Sardar Khair Bakhshmari, Sardar Ataullah Mangal, they all took refuge in Kabul. So Kabul
Yes.
hosted them as guests. They were receiving,
Okay.
as I understand, a lot of stipends, state state hospitality as well as stipends. And this was, they thought the support of the Soviet Union could basically help them materialize this dream of greater Pakhtunistan. But unfortunately, the Soviet Union itself then disintegrated.
But for example, let me come to this, that during the 1980s, when the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 transformed the region, Pakistan became the frontline state supporting the Afghan Mujahideen with the backing of the United States and the Saudi Arabia. In your view, how did the Soviet-Afghan War of the 1980s fundamentally change the political and militant landscape of the region? Can you please elaborate on this a little?
Well, obviously, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and literally occupied it in December 1979, this was again part of those socialist movements, the expansion and the proliferation of the socialist ideas into the neighborhood, away from beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. And then obviously it gave birth to this resistance and response from the United States, its allies. All of them then used obviously Pakistan as the staging post for the entire so-called jihad. So now, in retrospect, we can say that this was just an attempt to undermine the Soviet Union, give it a bloody nose, and restrict its westward expansion. And again, the 7 Mujahideen groups were very much Afghans. They had nothing really to do with Pakistan, other than the fact that they were drawing support via Pakistan. Pakistan was also facilitating them with camps, with the financial resources, with advice. So this, for the time being, basically push the idea of Durand Line at the back burner. However, this issue then obviously after the Soviet disintegration, after this Afghan civil war, it basically researched back in 2001, 2002 when President Hamid Karzai basically became the president. Even so, ever since the most of the Afghans have parroted this idea of Durand Line, saying that this is the unfinished agenda and it has to be corrected. And by compulsion, the Afghan Taliban have also embraced this idea. Even I remember back in the 1990s when Pakistan was very close to the Afghan Taliban when they first emerged on the Afghan scene out of the civil war that had followed the Soviet withdrawal in February 1980.
I'm sorry to cut you, but I actually want to frame the question around this debate that after the Soviet withdrawal and the collapse of the Afghan state in the 1990s, Pakistan's military and intelligence establishment began talking about the idea of strategic depth, which at least in theory, if I'm not wrong, was that a friendly government in Kabul would protect the security of the Pakistan on the Western Front, and thereby it will prevent encirclement by India. Now, many people also believe that Pakistan supported the Taliban in the 1990s. What exactly did the doctrine of strategic depth actually mean in practice?
Well, we have to go back to the 1970s when the idea of strategic depth was born. So it was I think because the relations was still strained between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the then Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, I think, sent people covertly as well as overtly to Afghanistan to gauge as to what were the possibilities. So one of the possibilities was co-opting certain Afghan individuals who could work together with Pakistan and protect Pakistan's interests in Afghanistan. So it was a time. It was a time when people like Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, Burhanuddin Rabbani, partially Ahmad Shah Massoud, Professor Abdul Rab Rasul Sayyaf, they were all students at that time of the Kabul University. So they were enlisted as part of Pakistan's strategy of creating a strategic depth inside Afghanistan, and this is where the strategic depth idea began evolving, and that basically matured, particularly with the beginning of the Afghan Jihad in the early 1980s. So that idea basically had a shelf life because after the Soviet withdrawal, I think the Pakistani military leadership began talking about the possibilities whether we can really have a friendly, favorable government without peddling this idea. So I remember our meetings with the former Army Chief General Ashfaq Kiani back in 2010 or 11, that this idea of strategic depth had died basically with the war on terror, and then the foremost endeavor was how to protect Pakistan from external aggression, how to develop relations with Afghanistan, and that was the core idea of strategic depth. So the strategic depth idea per se basically had died with the unfolding of the war on terror back in 2001 October, and I think this notion basically Pakistan Army realized that it was a futile exercise to hang on to an idea which basically doesn't bear any fruit, particularly when the local population is not with you. So this is what basically then forced the Pakistani leaders to abandon the idea like 25 years ago, because increasingly the Afghan people, the Afghan political stakeholders had grown anti-Pakistan, I would say, not anti-Pakistan, but they had grown wary of how they perceived Pakistan, Pakistan's involvement with the Afghan Taliban, and Pakistan's perceived anti-Kabul policies, which basically led to the abandoning of the idea of strategic depth.
Okay. So my next question to you is that one point that is under discussion during the current scenario is the difference between the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistan Taliban. An important, for example, Afghan Taliban, they focus on ruling the Afghanistan, while TTP, they focus or they seek to challenge the Pakistani state. Now, can you please elaborate that what are the key differences and similarities between TTP and Afghan Taliban, and are their goals different or similar in nature?
Well, primarily, they are the same as far as the ideology is concerned. They are both inspired by Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. They had inspired these people, and for the sake of Osama bin Laden, the former Taliban leader Mullah Omar basically forced Afghanistan into a 20-year war with the United States. He basically invited American aggression by refusing to hand over Osama bin Laden. So in that way, they are partners in arms. They are ideological partners. But as far as the Afghan Taliban, I think they are very much Afghanistan focused, nationalistic, largely Pashtun. They want a khilafat, a caliphate inside Afghanistan based on the Islamic Sharia. And they don't have a trans-border agenda the way propagated by the Al-Qaeda. But TTP, while it is ideologically much closer to the Afghan Taliban, its stated aim is also of a caliphate in the former federally administered tribal areas. But primarily,
Yes.
it's a terrorist proxy group, one of the so many franchises, like-minded franchises that are operating across Pakistan, Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and are located or based in Afghanistan. So they are as much a proxy terrorist group as the Baloch Liberation Army or Baloch Liberation Front. They are acting as proxies, and if you look at their activities, their campaign against the state of Pakistan and their demands, that basically narrows them down to small ragtag armies being in the service of some external forces who want continuous instability in this region, who don't want economic development. And the bigger objective is to target Chinese interests in the region and prevent China's westward expansion under the Belt and Road Initiative.
Okay. So another important aspect of this debate is the Pashtun nationalism, because millions of Pashtuns live on both sides of the Durand Line or border between the Pakistan and Afghanistan. Afghan leaders have always supported the idea of a unified Pashtun homeland. How has this is a broad and a generic question, but kindly tell us about it. How has Pashtun nationalism influenced Pakistan and Afghanistan relations over the decades?
The Afghan Pashtun nationalism, with proponents in Pakistan as well, had thrived and flourished over the years. But particularly after the 9/11 events in 2001, I think this dream, this notion of Greater Pashtunistan or unifying the so-called occupied lower Afghanistan areas with Afghanistan, I think came to a knot based on the over 4 decades of turmoil, political insecurity, state of war in Afghanistan, and the way Afghanistan has become marginalized politically and economically. So this basically also debunked that the idea of unification of the Pashtun lands. I think at one stage this was a very romantic idea. There were possibilities of Pashtuns of both sides of the border getting united. But the course of events have proved that the Pashtuns on the Pakistani side, largely in comparative terms, have flourished much more at a greater speed than
Okay.
their counterparts in Afghanistan. So the question is, do the Pashtuns living on the Pakistani soil still fancy the idea of Pashtunistan and a unification with Afghanistan, which is in tatters, where economy has been run down because of the political instability, which is fragmented, still very much tribal. Whereas, if you were to compare the Pakistani most big parts of Pakistani Pashtun lands, they would appear to a certain extent uh, a better part, a little part of Dubai or any other Arab state if you were to compare the most of the areas in Afghanistan and most of the areas in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or Balochistan. Pakistan is technologically, financially much more developed compared to Afghanistan. So this over a period of time, I think the progress inside the Pashtun areas of Pakistan, despite all the grievances, despite all the frustrations and deprivations that the Pashtun populations, particularly in the border regions, are facing, I think that the idea of Pashtun, Greater Pashtunistan or Pashtun unification has died down. I mean, if you come to Islamabad or go to Lahore, you see in Islamabad particularly, go to shopping malls, to the markets, every second, third person living in Islamabad is a Pashtun. So they're enjoying life here. So who would want to uh, move over to Afghanistan or get united with
Yeah.
Afghanistan, which has no future? And I
Yeah.
think we can ask these people, and in fact, it's on the contrary, that the dominant majority of Afghans want to run away from Afghanistan because of the peculiar political and economic conditions there. So if we were to open the border today, uh, probably 70-80% of Afghan population would love to move into Pakistan. So the
Yeah. Fair enough.
socio-economic transformation development basically has served as a disincentive or has disincentivized the idea of Greater Pashtunistan, I would say.
Okay. So if I'm moving towards fast forward to the 2021, when the United States withdrew from Afghanistan and the Taliban returned to power, many observers initially believed that Pakistan had regained its strategic influence in Kabul. But paradoxically, if we observe, the tensions have increased. My question is that after the US withdrawal and the Taliban's return to power, what factors played a role that shifted the balance or that has changed the strategic balance between the Pakistan and Afghanistan in the recent years?
Well, primarily the expectations that the Taliban 2 regime would be different from Taliban 1 proved wrong.
Okay.
Almost everybody got it wrong. If we look at the kind of regime that currently exists and the kind of decrees and the laws that are being practiced at the moment and the worldview of the Taliban, it doesn't seem to have changed at all. There are certainly disagreements within the Taliban government. That those in Kandahar uh, think differently from how those in eastern Afghanistan think.
Okay.
Like the Haqqanis, the greater Paktika region, eastern Afghanistan, is
Yes.
comparatively much more liberal, whereas they don't have enough political power to assert themselves uh, compared to Kandahar. The small core in Kandahar basically dictates what what and who will rule Afghanistan. So that divide has not uh, has not translated into liberal policies for Afghanistan, for females, in case of like in general human rights. It's a different story. But I think Kabul and Kandahar as a whole, if you look at them from a distance, it has not changed. And also the issues such as the Durand Line, issues such as the TTP, terrorism that is affecting Pakistan directly with bases inside Afghanistan. This is what has basically adversely impacted the dynamics of the bilateral relationship. And this is what basically forced Pakistan into going for the hard option, opting for kinetic attacks inside Afghanistan on the TTP hideouts.
Okay, so if we, in the recent turn of events, now that Islamabad had declared an open war against the Taliban, and if we talk about the dynamic of that India is playing in all of this fiasco, New Delhi has also been giving humanitarian aid to the Taliban, and it has also restored its embassy completely in Kabul, I guess in 2025. So, in your opinion, is Pakistan left in a very pincer position, in a very dangerous and stressful position that it always wanted to avoid over the decades?
Yeah, obviously, Pakistan is currently surrounded by threats. The border with India remains closed for nearly a year in the context of the Pahalgam terrorist attacks. The border with Afghanistan remains closed since October the 11th, 2025. And the relations officially as well as privately are nearly frozen. And this has basically delivered Afghanistan into the lap of India, I would say. So that's why, and since we have a very extremely strained hostile relationship with India, so it has basically seized the opportunity, endeared itself with Afghanistan, and Afghanistan has also warmed up to New Delhi's approaches, accepted its support very logically, because if it sees itself as isolated in the region, then obviously it would embrace anybody, any country that approaches it. This is what has happened in the case of Pakistan, and this has left Pakistan in a very critical situation, but also because of the situation on the southwestern border, the tensions in Iran, the American-Israeli war on Iran has added to Pakistan's vulnerabilities, I would say. So this is the new dynamic that Pakistan has to deal with: a surge in terrorist attacks, frozen relations with both India and Afghanistan, as well as stalled, nearly shut down borders with both countries. So this puts Pakistan in a very, very precarious diplomatic, political, and economic situation. Pakistan has literally become landlocked, because the only way available to it for its external trade is the Indian Ocean or the Arabian Sea via Karachi and via the Gwadar port. So Pakistan itself at the moment is in a very perilous situation, as its exports to Central Asia as well as to Afghanistan are frozen. The bilateral trade, whatever trade it was taking place between India and Pakistan, is also nearly non-existent. So that is not good for a country surrounded by so many threats, and so borders with neighbors which have immediate borders with this country.
Okay, so I'm just moving towards the end of this discussion. Being a veteran analyst, you and I both know that there will be a shift in the foreign policy of Pakistan, obviously, towards Afghanistan in the recent wake of events. Do you have an opinion that how should Pakistan lead or change or bring a shift into its foreign policy, because you have been the observer of the events for the last many decades? Do you have any suggestions for Pakistan, the leadership of Pakistan?
Well, I think no conflict ends with the use of force. We have seen for instance, the Americans and Israelis used all their might against Iran. They have decimated a lot of infrastructure inside Iran. But on March 9th, Donald Trump signaled at a press conference that the war may soon end. So this was
True.
most probably a message to the global markets, which have been reeling from uncertainty, that it was basically meant to inject some sort of confidence that we are ending the war. So the uncertainty should not basically disrupt the markets further. So the same way, I think Pakistan also needs to signal that it has demonstrated its power vis-a-vis Afghanistan. Uh, the Afghanistan also realizes that it has limitations in the absence of any modern defense, air defense or ground defense forces. Uh, so Pakistan, I think, at least as far as Afghanistan is concerned, should now signal somehow readiness for resuming formal contacts with Afghanistan, with a country with which we share 2,560-kilometer long border, and with so many friendships, relationships, cross-border trade linkages, and Pakistan's dependence on Afghanistan for its exports to Central Asia. So trade connectivity basically should dictate Pakistan's future course, future approach towards Afghanistan. And the only advice one could give was to try to resume dialogue after you have demonstrated your capability that you can strike deep into Afghanistan.
Okay, well, you have raised very good points, sir. I would like to thank you for joining us and revising the history with us and giving us a fresh perspective to see the history between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Shukriya.
Thank you
very
so
much.
much. Thank you so much.